When Joseph was sold into captivity by his brethren, and later the brethren needed the help of their brother Joseph, who had ascended to the higher ranks in ancient Kemetan society, to where they were able to be helped during the famine. It is written in the scriptures that says that his brothers meant that for evil, but the Creator meant it for good. Woo! So let me clarify that. I'm saying that if we had been accepted and continued to be able to receive the hospitalization care, to be able to go into their school system, to get the work permits, to get all of those benefits, if we had been allowed all of that, we would not today be what we are in the arena of preventive health care. We would not have developed the vegan diet. We would not have developed our all things in common sharing model of economics in social order in the community. We would not have taught children that we're not raising you to pursue a career. We're raising you and dedicating, not educating, we're dedicating you to the service of your people, of your community, and to the service of God and humanity. That's the mindset of our educational system. And so had we been integrated into the larger idea, none of that would have evolved. And so we look now and say that was a blessing for us.
So that tension, that non-integration process, as you said, was decades. It's 2 of y'all. It's 10 of y'all. It's dozens of y'all. Israel's like, wait a minute, we got problem. We got problem.
Right.
You all were not legally permitted to become citizens. You weren't given permission to make aliyah. Y'all were coming the same way other people come. You were traveling on those tourist passes, those guest passes.
3 months.
3 months. You get 90 days. And then you all were overstaying your visits. You were saying, well, look, I'm going to just stay. They're not. And it's true. I mean, they don't necessarily go looking for you. Although being black with a dashiki makes it easier. I should say they don't go looking for most people. I know some people from Europe who have overstayed their passes. I know some people who've been there 10 years.
Yeah.
And they just bebopping through West Jerusalem like nothing.
No problem.
But y'all show up and they're like, who are you? They're looking for your passes. You don't have them or they've expired, but you still got to live. You still got to work. And you got to find a way to escape the scrutiny of the state, of police officers, of IDF soldiers. You all basically were undocumented immigrants, undocumented residents of Israel, right? You all,
right? Correct.
And as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that came with some, not just tension and anxiety from having to hide and move outside the law, but you also got exploited a lot under those conditions.
When brothers who did not have work permits, back in those days in the 70s and even into the early 80s, you only were paid once a month. That was it wasn't every other week and so forth. And so we worked jobs and we worked for people who knew we did not have legal status. And they would often take advantage of us. They would run off with our money and we had no legal recourse. Right. And so, but that played into the fact that even if a brother, say, was arrested on a work site and deported, which happened, we've had waves in our history where that did happen, where, a dozen here, a dozen there were actually arrested and deported. We would not allow his family to go without. So we developed an economic order in the community where we all put into the pot and took out according to what the needs were of the families. And that remains a central cornerstone of our social order. So again, that was a blessing for us. And honestly, great sacrifices were made because some of those brethren never got back. Never.
Right. And I've heard those stories of, I'll be back tomorrow. And next thing you get a call 3 days there and they're in the airport in DC or New York. Yeah. And so when that happens, the state knows who y'all are and they know where y'all are. Y'all were pretty much all in Dimona. Y'all were all in the South. Why didn't they just come get all y'all and deport you? They could have done that, right?
They could have, Mark, but we like to think that we have a saying: they didn't bring us here, they can't put us out. And that's brash again, but that's our interpretation of who we are, and that there's a bigger force, there's a greater force that's running this show. And so I'm sure, and we know, we have the history, we've seen it, where we were regarded as worse than the PLO by members of Knesset, uh,
Yes.
and deputy prime ministers who made these statements that we should be put on a barge, taken into the Mediterranean, and sunk. So we have that history, but there's always someone, and this is biblical. In the days of Yeshua in New Testament writings, there's always someone in the ranks of the councils who stand up and say, but maybe you need to leave them men alone, leave them brothers and sisters alone, because if they are who they say they are, you're not fighting them, you're fighting against God. And so that gives them pause. And we know that there have been modern manifestations of that kind of consciousness and voice in the Israeli society, who do in fact recognize the validity of our claims.
April 22nd, 1986. It's a big day, where the state in some ways absolutely did, as they say, scripture, test that spirit. They break down what happened on April 20th, because I think it's a pivotal moment in the history, and maybe a watershed moment in the history of the Hebrew Israelites in Jerusalem.
It was. We call that day the day of the show of strength. And what culminated in that was the arrest a month and a half prior of 47 of our members who were living up in the central part of the country. We were working as basically migrant workers in a orange packing plant. And for us, it was great because we got a lump sum of money. We got tons of oranges that kept us healthy through the winter months with the vitamin C. And so for us, it was, I mean, for some of the children, it was like a vacation to go and work at the orange packing plant in those days. And so we look up, and 47 of our members, ranging in ages from 65 down to 18, were arrested and threatened with deportation. We regarded that as that would break our back. That was something that we could not allow, and we began to strategize on how we could counter that. And we decided that we were going to march in mass from Dimona. We were going to all wear white. It was leading up to the Passover season. We were going to march in mass from Dimona to Jerusalem. And we
far, by the way, that's 140 kilometers. That's like an hour and a half driving.
Uphill.
Right.
And one of the brothers recently, one of the other Israelite brothers recently was trying to tell me that Jerusalem was not mountainous. I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. You know what it takes.
A lot of time in Jerusalem is mountainous.
Any direction you're going up, and for extended periods of time. So we had our contingencies. We all had backpacks. Brothers had our staffs. We were serious about that as a protest, that we were going to Jerusalem to demand that our status be addressed, that these men and women be freed. And on the morning of that march, and we didn't ask for permission to protest, but on the morning of that march, the night before, Israeli Defense Forces, Israeli police from all around the region, they had people to be moved from their homes, adjoining the community here, the village here. They cordon off the city, roadblocks. We wake up and we're surrounded with tanks up on the hills here. Back then, where you stayed in the guest house, the nice domicile you mentioned earlier on, that whole neighborhood was not there. That was simply the edge of the city. And so there were tanks up there. The police had dogs. As you see, they got riot gear, batons. and we look up and they're shouting at us in the bullhorns and saying, "Go back to your homes. You're breaking the law of Israel." They were determined not to let us leave and begin that march. And so we that's the priesthood who led us. They lead us in prayer, and they were out front of the line of those who were going to leave that day. And when Ben-Ami came out, it's a testimony of the kind of the confusion in situations like that can often occur. That you can say one thing, and by the time it gets to the front of the line, it's something completely different.
Yes.
And so what he said was, "Stay in your places." By the time it got up to the front of the line, it was "Step out."
Right.
And so the brothers in the front wound up. They began to, and so it just testifies.
That's either miscommunication or agent.
Right. There was no fear. There was no fear by anyone in the community, even in the face of all that. And you've got to understand the context for this day, that this was a few years after Jonestown. And we had been labeled a Jonestown style cult.
They called y'all the vegan cult, the Jonestown cult, all of it.
Vegan polygamous cult, absolutely. And so with that context, we could see, and this is what Ben-Ami saw when he came out and saw what was going on. And he says it in the course of his message that day, which is part of the video that you're showing, where he actually says, "We know what you came prepared to do, but we're not going to give you that opportunity. We came to this land in peace. We wanted to go to Jerusalem in peace. We wanted to keep the Passover." And so what kind of man, what kind of country, government would want to keep us from keeping the feast, keeping the Passover instructions? And so that became, he said, "We're not going to let you, we're not going to buy or play into that, and we will stay. We will hold our places." So we went into a 5-day fast, and Ben-Ami said it that day. He said, "You can't stay here. You're going to have to go back to your homes." And so that particular day, with all of the press that got word of what was going on, even though they tried to keep them away, they started to come and they began to interview us. And for the first time, Mark, you had journalists who were actually able to hear what we were talking about and who we were and what our narrative was. And they began to say, "That makes sense. And that's nothing like what I've heard." And one particular journalist, a few years later, he came to us and he broke down crying. And he said, "I wrote so many negative articles about you all." And he said, "Whatever it is I need to do to set this right," he said, I need to do it.
Wow.
But that was the reality that we faced back then. So that is the day of the show of strength. And from that moment, things began to turn.
Game changer. So that's where I want to go. And I know I'm mindful of time, and I'm mindful of the Sabbath, which is coming up sooner than later. So I'm gonna show this picture really fast.
Yeah.
Because this is a heck of a moment, from show of strength and vegan cults to you all standing hand in hand with the then Prime Minister. Is that Shimon Peres?
That is Shimon Peres, yes.
That is Shimon Peres, Prime Minister of Israel, I believe on his 85th birthday.
His 85th birthday, correct.
Yeah. Correct. And that has been, for those who don't know, that has been Ben Yehudah. We're in the red there, on our right to his left.
And that's the mayor of Dimona on the left.
And that's the mayor of Dimona, who I would not know. That is the mayor of Dimona. And Dimona, of course, for those who don't know, is a town in southern Israel, in the Naqab, as we say in Arabic, or the Negev. It is very south. I've spent time there. I do my research in Jerusalem, but I would spend time there only to hang out with y'all. People are starting to understand the southern part a little differently now because of Gaza and because of Eilat and because of all the different areas. All that to say, Dimona is an interesting place. And I've seen the racial tensions. I've seen people talk about y'all, hear people talk about y'all. It's gotten a lot better. And this picture is evidence of it. But to go from a show of strength to that picture, a couple of things had to happen. I'm going to tell you what I think the three biggest contributors were. And you tell me if I'm wrong, or tell me where I'm wrong. I'm sure I'm wrong somewhere. Number one was the fact that you all stood fearlessly against the state, but didn't kill anybody,
right?
Didn't fight anybody. So you got good public relations, which allowed people to reimagine your citizenship.
Yeah.
Or I won't use the word citizenship, your belonging there.
Yes.
Because citizenship is a legal term that we're going to talk about right before we go. Yeah. Second thing is, you all did change your public narrative a bit. And when I read the writings of the 60s and 70s, I hear more of a critique of Israeli Jews and of European Jews. You weren't like the Hebrew Israelites in America that are yelling and screaming about, and I don't mean that to disrespect them. I just mean they literally yell and scream on corners. That's part of their proselytization. And they have a very different understanding of Europeans. They talk about Europeans differently. They talk about Africans differently, for that matter. So you all had a public narrative that was more welcoming as well. And then the third thing that I think was important is you all, or your children, joined the Israeli army. You joined the IDF. So you, and you can talk to me about what that means, or if I'm getting that chronology wrong. But it seemed to me that being willing to join the IDF showed a commitment to the state of Israel, both for probably personal reasons. We live here. We want to be, we see ourselves as needing defense, but also you had skin in the game. Again, that point, the public relations and the kind of shifting narratives. When I say shifting, I don't mean that you all changed your ideology. I just mean you took a different approach.
The emphasis.
The emphasis. Yes. I'm saying those are the three reasons. That would be what I would, if I were writing a book on y'all, which I'm not, but if I were, those would be three things that I would be thinking about in terms of how you all changed. Tell me what you think about that.
No, you're correct on all three counts, Mark. There's a little, the chronology is a little different, but it's all part of the continuum of the broader acceptance. But at that particular time, that in that picture, for example, by that time we did have status. However, it was in 1989, early 1990, Ben-Ami was approached by the then Minister of Interior, Aryeh Deri, who was a member of the Shas party, the ultra-Orthodox, but the Mizrahi side of the family, the North African, the Moroccan, the Yemenite, the Iraqi Jew family, the Tunisian, the Libyan Jews, the Egyptian Jews who were living in these areas. And so he literally said, look, I've grown up with you in this land, and I want us to normalize these relationships, these relationships between us. Yeah. And so that's what led to the agreement whereby we would be, first of all, and this is important, that we would first of all be re-documented as American citizens. And that's because back in the 70s and 80s, knowing that they were trying to deport us, we en masse renounced our US citizenship. And that prohibited them from being able to deport us because we were technically stateless at that point. So that, and that was a huge statement because everyone was trying, and still is trying, to get to America. And here we are snubbing our noses at America. And so that was the, like you said, there was a respect that we were given. We did not change the narrative. Our narrative has always been what it is, but the emphasis, unlike many of the brothers and sisters on the street, or not sisters, because they don't let their sisters on the streets, but the brothers in the Hebraic community that are pushing the narrative, we don't need to attack anyone else's narrative. We just put ours forward, and that's sufficient. We don't need to undermine anyone else's claim. I'm not an expert in their claim, how they claim connection to these lands. I'm not an expert in that. I'm an expert in how we claim ours. And so that alone that was a little less offensive, a little less controversial. And so those things combined, and then once we did get the U.S. citizenship back, it led to the temporary residency, permanent residency, and ultimately it was to lead to citizenship within 7 years. That was the original plan. There's been a lot of hitches in that, and a lot of it is attributable to new pharaohs that knew not Joseph. But nevertheless,
is Netanyahu that new pharaoh? Is Netanyahu, because he's been leader for much of the last decade and a half, and certainly, and even back in the 90s for a little bit, is Netanyahu resistant to you all in a way that the other prime ministers weren't?
It's strange, and it's kind of hard to ferret out sometimes because of the political situation. This coalition government. Netanyahu's hands are very much tied, and this really speaks to the current situation. Many people think that with Netanyahu out, that things are going to change somehow here in the state. That's not getting ready to happen. Netanyahu made his coalitions built, and a critical element of that was the religious parties. And the religious parties, over all those years that he was prime minister, has been prime minister, they control the Ministry of Interior. And so therefore, anything that has to do with who is a Jew, who can return, who's legally allowed to be here, et cetera, citizenship status issues, residency, all of that is in the hands of the religious parties.
Right. And the rabbis control all of it. The rabbinate controls all of it.
And they are the ones who historically have been most at our necks, and who most wanted us to be out.